So if you look at the DPI, like you mentioned, Nigeria stands in between. If you look at global space, so where a peer like South Africa is actually doing way better, it means there's room for improvement. However, in Nigeria, there have been some recent improvements, particularly in urban areas. We've seen a large increase in internet penetration, and we've also seen that broadband usage has also increased. It's not just about providing internet, it has to be affordable. How do you ensure that the internet is affordable to those even in the rural areas? The government is trying to cut down on things like subsidies. So if the government can subsidize internet usage, I mean, there are other innovative ways like encouraging competition in the sector. That has always been effective in driving down prices across every sector, across every part of the world.
So what role do you think data governance can play in ensuring that Nigeria reaps the social and economic benefits of living and thriving in a digital economy? Operating in a digital economy is more than just technology. It requires safety and it requires trust. Hi, I'm your host Onyinye, and in this episode we'll be delving into how digital governance intersects with digital preparedness. Today I'm joined by Mr. Anthony Okon, a research fellow here at CSEA, and we'll be taking insights from CSEA's Digital Preparedness Index. You're welcome to the podcast, Mr. Anthony.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we'll be talking on today's conversation about digital preparedness and data governance. And diving into that, the first thing I wanted to speak to you or ask you about is, what does digital preparedness mean for a country like Nigeria? And why is this digital preparedness so important for data governance?
I think the issue of digital preparedness for every country is very important, and it goes beyond the mere question of how many people have access to the internet, how many people use social media. It's actually a more encompassing concept. It has to do with a country's willingness to integrate digital technologies to every part of the country, from the economy to governance to even basic things like healthcare. It has to be an encompassing approach that goes beyond just very little things. And for a country to be digitally prepared, we can look at three key things. First, the level of infrastructure that has been put in place. So infrastructure in terms of electricity, broadband infrastructure, the internet facilities that are actually available that can drive digital technology adoption. And secondly, another key thing is human capital. So the human capital in terms of the technical know-how, the manpower available to be able to use the modern technology that can drive digital technology adoption. And finally, which is one of the most important, we talk about the institutions. So for institutions, it has to do with the laws, the policies, and the governance framework in place. And that's where the issue of data governance comes in. For you to say you're digitally prepared, then you should have a strong data governance framework in place, because the digital era comes with a lot of use of data. It's driven by data usage. And how do you ensure that people's data is safely stored, safely collected, safely shared? You need data governance to be able to drive that. So I don't think any country can actually say they are digitally prepared without actually having, data governance in place.
Right. I like that the way you answered the first question, directed itself into broadband technologies, telecommunications infrastructure. It's because I wanted to speak to that. When we speak about broadband and telecommunications infrastructure, we are talking about the physical, aspects of technology that keep businesses and homes connected to the internet. So when we think about, masts, we think about cyber optic cables. So where does Nigeria stand with respect to these infrastructure? So currently, I think, according to our index, CSEA's DPI index, Nigeria stands at 0.4 while South Africa stands at 0.8. So there's a bit of a gap when we're talking about competitiveness in that, respect. So where does Nigeria stand with respect to digital infrastructure, and how is it going to affect us in the long run if we continue on that path?
Thanks. So if you look at the DPI, like you mentioned, Nigeria stands in between. If you look at the global space, so where a peer like South Africa is actually doing way better, it means there's room for improvement. However, in Nigeria, there have been some recent improvements, particularly in urban areas. Okay. We've seen a large increase in internet penetration, and we've also seen that broadband usage has also increased in just urban areas. However, rural areas, there's still that digital divide where the urban areas are able to utilize this digital technologies, while the rural areas don't even have the basic infrastructure.
Get left behind in essence.
So it creates inequality. So basically, I'll give you instances. A child in, let's say, the urban part of Lagos, for example, can take part in online classes. Even people actually do their studies online these days. You can take online courses and all that. Right. However, a student in a rural area does not even have the information that such thing exists, not to talk of having access to the infrastructure they need. Same thing with healthcare. People in the urban areas tend to have access to better information and digital technologies compared to those in rural areas. You can go on and on, even for businesses in, let's say, Lagos, for example, or urban areas. Basically, they have access to larger markets. They can leverage. Exactly. They can leverage e-commerce platforms to be able to have a wider reach. However, if you're a business in a rural area, your market is literally a rural area. So
you're limited by that.
It creates that inequality between the urban and rural areas across every aspect of the economy.
All right. So you mentioned that there's a gap between the urban and the rural areas. What practical steps do you think are the first steps to take when it comes to bridging that gap?
Like I mentioned earlier when I was listing the requirements for a country to be digitally prepared, one of the key areas is infrastructure. So infrastructure in terms of the broadband infrastructure, internet, even basic things like electricity, they're actually very important. And then when you have that, you also need to have the skills. So there's also the need to invest in human capital development to be able to build the skills of people that are actually able to put this technology into use. And like we also highlighted earlier, data governance is a very important thing. I mean, if you are going to set up all this new technology to be in place, how do you ensure that the users are actually protected from any form of harm? And I think one key issue that is coming up these days is the fact that it's not just about providing internet. It has to be affordable. How do you ensure that the internet is affordable to those even in the rural areas? The government is trying to cut down on things like subsidies. So if the government can subsidize internet usage, I mean, there are other innovative ways like encouraging competition in the sector that has always been effective in driving down prices across every sector, across every part of the world. So I feel like if we're able to drive investment in infrastructure, invest in human capital, also have a solid data governance regulation in place, and also ensure that the internet facilities are actually affordable and digital equipment or tools are also affordable and within reach for everyone, that will actually bridge the digital gap.
Yeah. That's very interesting. So you mentioned something about data governance and its importance in even ensuring that people who use the internet are safe. So I want to lean more into the digital transformation of an economy, right? So what role do you think data governance can play in ensuring that Nigeria reaps the social and economic benefits of living and thriving in a digital economy?
Well, The world is moving towards services sector. So, for example, Nigeria's economy recently is being driven by the service sector. And when you talk about the service sector, you see that there are a lot of industries coming in that are driven by artificial intelligence,
Right.
merging technology, let's say e-commerce platforms and all that. Nigeria actually needs to tap into this. And how do you tap into it? It's not just about, saying you want to put data governance in place. When you have the data governance in place, data governance comes from you having data from the modern technology you're actually the digital technologies you're integrating into your economy. You have to make sure you're able to make good use of it. How do you do that? You need to know how to analyze the data. So there are a lot of predictive models right now that are data driven. For example, you want to understand consumer behavior, what will drive a customer, for example, to make repeated purchases and all that. That's data driven. Without having the capacity to do all this analysis yourself, you can't actually benefit from this. And the way the world is actually moving, if Nigeria does not actually step up to integrate this, you would be left behind. I mean, both socially, where I discussed about the issue of inequality. If you don't have, if you don't scale up to be able to meet this level, then you have that high level of inequality in place. And also, if you don't scale up your investment as well, you're going to have a situation where there's still that huge divide where and the divide here moves beyond the just rural urban divide. We'll have a situation where Nigeria is actually left behind because they can't actually tap into the global economy.
Right.
If you're even talking about issues like geopolitics, it's data driven. You need data to stay up to date, to know what to do, to know where the world is, to be able to compete globally. You actually need data. So if Nigeria doesn't have this, then we'll actually be left behind.
Yeah. So I like that you spoke again about the use of data by businesses, right? To keep up with what's happening globally, to ensure that they're not being left behind. But behind all of these things, there is all of these things we've discussed. There's a place for trust, there's a place for safety. So I want to lean into that a bit more to understand what you think can be done with regards to keeping our data safe, or, privacy issues, to ensure that Nigerians are more willing to engage with technology, to engage with innovation, because that's also very key.
Yeah. I think one of the most important drivers of your every digital economy is actually the ability to drive trust. I mean, without trust, then you have a case of low adoption. If people don't actually adopt digital technologies, then there's no way it's going to grow. I mean, Nigeria, we've had instances in the past where people try to access your BVN or NIN to be able to use it for fraudulent activities. I mean, if those key things are not protected, then you have a situation where people tend to lose money, or sometimes they even lose their jobs because their accounts were used for fraudulent activities. And it can even lead to situations where people tend to harm themselves because they lose all their life savings and all.
And all of those things kind of add up to, holding people back from adopting technology.
Exactly. So it's not possible to actually say you want to have a digital economy without actually getting people to trust you. So fintechs, for example, we've seen platforms like OPay actually growing rapidly. Why are they growing? People actually trust them with their data. Even beyond the money, you want to know your data is safe with them.
Secure.
There's no leakage, there's no disclosure. So it's very important to actually build trust to be able to drive the digital economy for every country. And how do you do that? Data governance. That's actually the key to everything. You need to make sure you have a clear framework in place and a clear strategy on how you actually protect people. You need to have your institutions to be strong enough to ensure that the legal framework can actually protect people. Privacy is very important. Privacy is a key issue when you talk about trust, if I know that my data is safe and my privacy is actually ensured, then of course the adoption levels will start going up. But
Right.
if that's not in place, then it can't work out.
Yeah, so I want to now drive back to the Digital Preparedness Index, especially CC's Digital Preparedness Index. What lessons do you think Nigeria can learn from countries who have successfully, merged or been able to intersect or balance between digital preparedness and data governance?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of lessons that can be learned. So I'll just mention 2 countries. So Estonia, for example, if you look at the index, the key thing they've done is to have a strategy in place, to have a master plan that has been able to drive adoption, that has been able to, define a clear path for all the actors in the economy to follow. So, I mean, from the end users to the government, the regulators,
That's impressive.
even the service providers, they've been able to put that in place. So that makes a case for Nigeria to ensure that they actually have a clear national strategy to guide the digital adoption. And then I'll also talk about Rwanda. So Rwanda, for example, they've done a lot of investments in infrastructure and across every level, the urban and rural areas, and that has been able to drive digital adoption significantly, and that's why we see that their DPI is actually high compared to Nigeria. So going back to Nigeria, drawing from other countries generally, I mean, it's important to have a strategy. Like I mentioned, it's important to invest in infrastructure, and then it's important to build trust. So trust is very important. And how do you build trust? You engage with stakeholders, the key stakeholders, the users. You try to reassure the end users, for example, that their data is safe. And the world is moving towards digital adoption. It's largely data driven, driven by digital technologies. So you try to communicate to people why they need to actually upgrade themselves to move with the trend, otherwise they'll be left behind. I mean, I gave the example of businesses.
Right.
If you don't adopt, you have a limited market, you can't expand into the global market. The same thing with education, healthcare. You need to actually make sure you have the ecosystem working together for things to play out. So for Nigeria, I mean, it's really not difficult. They are the basic things. It's 2025 and it's unfortunate we still talk about the basic things. Infrastructure, energy infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, internet penetration, human capital development. You need to, empower people, talk to them about why they need to build their skills. I mean, even to upgrade your skills on digital technologies, you need basic things like computers. Where
you need internet access.
How do people in rural areas actually have access to these things?
How do they afford these things?
How can they afford it? It's very difficult. So it might be overwhelming for the governments to get everything done by themselves, and that's where the private sector comes in.
All right. I like that. I like the way this conversation is going because it's actually been very broad and far-reaching. We've spoken about security. We've spoken about why embracing the digital economy is important for a country to scale geopolitically. We've also, shown where the gaps exist. So the next thing we would move into is, what do you think is, one of the worst things or the highest levels of risks that could come into play if Nigeria's digital infrastructure continue to lag behind?
Okay, so like you mentioned geopolitics.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different aspects. So first off, socially, like I mentioned earlier, inequality is a very, very crucial issue which every country aims to address. I mean, when you have the urban-rural divide where businesses are left behind, individuals are left behind, they are deprived access to modern healthcare, education, e-commerce and all that. You have a situation where people are displaced, and it also discourages investment. So that brings me to the economic aspect. When you don't have an economy that actually encourages people to embrace digital technologies, you have a situation where investments are less because people want to invest in countries where they're seeing that these countries are actually embracing the digital era. They are actually digitalizing every aspect of their economy. However, if we're still stuck on just exporting things like just crude oil or basic agricultural products, then we will be left behind because these things do not have value in them. We sell them at the crude form most times, and our earnings there are way less compared to embracing digital technology, which presents a lot of opportunities that are untapped, where it also gives the country access to a lot of markets. Even geopolitically, if you don't update yourself with data, if you are not able to play around with data and analyze the data to make sense out of it, how do you stay in touch with what's happening? How do you stay in touch with trends? How do you compete with your peers? How do you even compete with other economies? So it's very important, otherwise the country would actually be left behind. Not just Nigeria as a country, but even the citizens, the businesses and all investors would
lose
actually
the ability
not
to compete globally. Yeah. So I think that even feeds into the last thing, which you could speak to, but it's more of a question for our listeners to chew on, right? What role does policy play in balancing governance and preparedness? That is ensuring that digital growth happens alongside digital innovation in a way that does not infringe on human rights.
Well, we all know technology can actually be disruptive.
Yeah.
It can be very disruptive, and that's why I've been emphasizing throughout this conversation data governance, having a structure or a framework in place. Exactly, the institutions in place, because due to the fact that technology comes with a lot of innovations, these innovations can actually push out the human aspect of decision making. It can even lead to issues such as job displacement or even the basic everyday needs that might be seen as trampling on human rights. So policy needs to come in terms of having a clear framework or regulations that actually protect people in the economy against any harm. You need to actually make sure the innovations coming in place are well people oriented. They are aligned with what people need and do not cause harm in any way. So you need to have a clear framework in place to protect people. But I also love to read what the listeners would actually put.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Yes. So thank you so much for coming on to this podcast.
Thank you very much.
It was very lovely having you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like this conversation would not be complete if I didn't let you, the listeners, in on the amazing work we're doing here at CSEA in the data governance project. So the first thing you want to do is to visit our website at www.ccafrica.org. And once you're in, you want to navigate to the programs section of the website. You visit the data governance section and then you click on Data Governance Index. And this should immediately let you in on charts, data, map views, and list views that lets you see what we're doing, both for Nigeria and for Africa. So yes, we cut across borders. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the CC Podcast. I found this episode to be insightful and educative, and I hope you did too. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.